Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I'm your co-host, JP John Paz, with a two-man power trip. Joining me is the financial wrestling genius himself, Mr. Lavie Margolin. Lavie, how you doing today, sir?
Hey John, I'm doing well. As people can imagine, I'm not gonna rob a bank or something, but I am very cold here in New York. I'd imagine New Jersey, it's the same issue. It seems like as we're recording this all over the country, there's winds everywhere. It's causing fires to push fires in California. So hopefully the world will calm down here early in 2025.
It is getting, I don't know, pretty crazy out there. There's no doubt about that. Weather-wise, too, getting nuts. But let's start off, before we have a guest join us, let's start off with a little news. Let's talk about TNA wrestling because there's a lot going on in the world of TNA right now.
So, as we were talking about last episode, we were learning that TNA had already been distributing its programming reruns on in Pittsburgh on the sports channel there, and then we began hearing about, of course, the Nesson distribution. So I was like, okay, there has to be something happening here. Is anyone else aware of distribution? And somebody tagged Right Now TV, a diginet that covers about a third of the country. We'll get into how all those stats work. And they are going to begin, or maybe they've already begun, distributing TNA wrestling. So TNA taking a distribution stance to get their programming out there through reruns, through some of these low-profile stations, whether it's regional sports networks or actually in the case of NASN, as we've talked about, their national feed, which is about 5 million people. But Right Now TV, their coverage, according to Rabbit Ears, is, again, 33% of the country, about 100 million. But a good rule of thumb when you're thinking about it is to multiply that by 0.18, about 18% of people have the antenna that could pick up a digital station. So we're seeing all this, things going on. So I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing TNA and other digital networks like U2 America. One of the things to think about as well, and I'd love to ask our guest in a few minutes what he thinks about this, is that I'm wondering if this sort of foretells that maybe TNA doesn't see an opportunity for getting on another network in addition to the ones that they already own here in the U.S., specifically Access TV, or this is just secondary rights, and it doesn't really affect things moving forward. What do you think, John?
Yeah, interesting. I'm not really sure, what's going to happen with that. With TNA, I'm always kind of curious what direction they're headed in and what's going to happen with them.
Yeah, so that's their TV side. Before moving on from TV, a lot of TV news. So John Pollock, of course, our friend at Post Wrestling, had the Sportsnet 360 debut audience, and some people were really ragging on this rating, but I didn't think it was bad from what I could tell. Their debut was 36,000 viewers, 16,000 in the 25 to 54 demographic. Of course, you have to remember Canada is a lot smaller than America, but
Yep.
also it's about half of what NXT was doing in December on the same network. NXT was averaging in December 76,700, 27,700 in the demo. So what would you expect? TNA doing about half of NXT ratings makes a lot of sense. TNA also investing in talent, re-signing talent. Masha Slamovich, one of my favorites. Ash by Elegance, who has a lot of strong momentum towards coming in. John Schuyler has been re-signed as well. I'm not as familiar with his work. We're keeping our eye on Slammiversary. So 1,636 tickets distributed. However, In the last 7 days, when WrestleTix last reported, just 16 tickets were moved. So we'll probably start seeing it quiet for a while. And finally, with TNA, they ran a fan survey, but it's not too in-depth, so I'm not sure what they're planning on learning. What is currently missing in professional wrestling as an industry? Better, more storylines, quality matches, more superstar talents, more cross-promotion. What matches... what matters to you most? Superstar talent, cross-promotion, quality matches, good story and surprises, or other. Where do you keep updated and watch TNA Wrestling? Social media, TNA Plus, Access TV, YouTube, news sites, TNA Wrestling. I don't because I'm not interested. And then they sort of, and anyone can mess this up, but they did. They mixed up question 4 and they put it firstly as a choice in question 3. What would you like more of or different from TNA Wrestling? Actual question 4. What would you like more of or different from TNA Wrestling? I'm not sure what that means exactly, but that's an open-ended question. So it'll be interesting to see if the responses affect anything of what they're doing creatively or otherwise. But I think if you were going to make the efforts to do such a survey, maybe.
How about AAA? Let's get into AAA a little bit here.
So, John, I've been working my networks here, and I can't reveal my sources, although I do have 2 sources from 2 distinct areas, both of whom would be fairly knowledgeable. And what I'm getting is positivity towards the AAA Unamas relationship continuing. Maybe that information will have broken by the time some people are listening to this, or depending on how they're watching it on YouTube. But hopefully I'm the one to break it. But the interesting thing and why there was question marks about it and why I started inquiring, of course, we had the word that, the overall parent was going to be cutting back on its sports division, and AAA would be one of the victims of this on Unamas. But then Lucha Blog, who covers this more than anyone, had noted that Lucha Libre AAA was promoting content that was forthcoming on Unamas. So it certainly continued in some form into 2025. Hopefully, if it does continue, we can get ratings at some point, as it might be one of the strongest ratings outside of WWE or AEW. Maybe less than WoW, but above some of the others.
How about New Japan Pro Wrestling? What's the latest on them? What's the latest on Hiroshi Tanahashi?
So when I first saw that New Japan was going to run Windy City Riots on April 11th in the Wintrust Arena, the 10,000 plus seat Wintrust Arena that they've ran before, I was sort of like, what are they thinking? Because we've seen the US numbers, and I think I sort of had that last year. What are they thinking? I think they ran there last year as well. But Tanahashi will have his last match apparently on US soil, so there's certainly some cachet to that, or a lot of cachet, depending on the opponent. There could be a lot there to work with. So an interesting litmus test for a draw for New Japan, certainly. But looking at the Battle in the League show on January 11th, which is just forthcoming as we're recording. It's a few days out. WrestleTix had at that point 1,272 tickets distributed of a setup of 2,143. One of the things that we'll have to watch out for is just a day or two before, if it looks like a lot of tickets are being distributed. That's happened in the past with New Japan, where they sort of catch up in California. We'll see if that is the case as well. And I'm not sure if there was too much promotional material, but on the schedule is the Resurgence show on May 9th in Ontario, California, as well. Another big venue. So, I'm not so sure, because these venues in California seem to be the right fit for them, but they're going big in Chicago and Ontario. The other story, of course, that everyone is already following, but an interesting one to think about is the relationship with AEW coming out of Wrestle Dynasty, of course, at the Tokyo Dome. Kidani was disappointed. Maybe it would have been better to do this at a distance. As for things to reflect on, I think we weren't able to create the feel of a joint event nor a rivalry, so it ended up being a bit half-hearted. That's something to reflect on. But whether advertently or inadvertently, there is a rivalry being developed that's coming out from the various talents. What's that guy's name? Kid was ragging on AEW, and of course, Chris Charlton apparently was tough on AEW in commentary for New Japan. That's something that, you know, I feel bad about. Chris, obviously, he's like a super fan, and this is a lifelong dream and something that he deserves to have this role. And it seems like he has an indefinite suspension now, you know, which has to be very upsetting. I haven't heard what he said exactly to comment on that or not, but I hope that it all turns around for him. The fact that he wasn't outright fired, you know, is a good sign, I guess, for, you know, him having the opportunity to come back from something like this, which I hope that he does.
Some anti-AEW sentiment. I believe he did call Tony Khan a money mark as well, so that might have led to a small suspension there for Chris. Hopefully he's back ASAP. But hey, look at this. Returning guest right now, Lavie. We've got Matt Ryan returning once again to the show. Matt, what's going on?
Nothing much. Thanks so much for having me back on, guys. Really glad to be here and kicking off 2025 with y'all.
What are you up
Welcome
to?
back.
Yeah, what are you up to, historically speaking? Literally, historically speaking.
Yeah, I've been taking some time off after the A7FL season this past July. Catalyst Wrestling in a bit of a hiatus as we reorganize not only the company, but our lives, you know, real life. I say this to talent all the time. Real life is more important than professional wrestling, even though sometimes I don't necessarily live like that. It sometimes is the inverse, but we've been figuring out next steps and things look great for that. But I've always been interested in the history of pro wrestling. Obviously, you guys are as well. Lavie literally wrote a book about it, and looking at the posters on the wall and what you've been doing with Two Man Power Trip. For me, it's about finding the different connecting tissue that lead us from the slam bang wrestling era of Toots Mondt, one of the most, if not most interesting and most important figures in wrestling history, to what we see now in WWE, AEW, New Japan Pro Wrestling. There's a lot of things that bind it together. And there's a lot of what could have been, what should have been, what might have been. And this show, with the simple thesis of just trying to tell the story of the first national wrestling promotion. Eddie Einhorn and Pedro Martinez's IWA/ICW. If you watched cheap seats like I did when you were growing up in the early 2000s, you saw them do a couple of episodes of that. And it's a really interesting story. And I've been finding a lot of really cool stuff that really set the table for the birth of the WWE, constant wrestling wars. It's just wrestling's always been an unstable business. What we have now is the most stable time in professional wrestling history in terms of multiple promotions operating within the same market share or the same market sector. Because if you look at the history of New York wrestling and we deep dive into like the New York wrestling scene of not only here in New York City where I live, but up in Buffalo, the story revolves around the Rust Belt and a lot of the part of the country, and just how weird and screwed up and politically fakaked the New York wrestling scene and the NWA at that time really were.
I love it. I love that you're doing this. It's just one of those things where it's the research. something hard? Because I feel like some of that's got to be hard to come by, and like that process for you has to be because it's. I mean, you're really diving deep there.
It's fun. It taps into my background in radio, my background in quote unquote journalism, and just my love of telling a story with audio, and just finding stuff. Luckily, I have some resources, thanks to the wonderful world of professional wrestling internet, to where I have copies of books. Tim Hornbaker, who is probably one of the best and most well-researched authors in the space, has a lot of great work on this. Jim Wilson's book Chokehold gives a lot of great, interesting perspective on Pedro Martinez and the consent decree, which is actually the focus of the episode I'm writing now, which is chapter 3 of what is now an 8-chapter story. It might end up being 45 with the deep rabbit hole bullshit I do. And I try to keep the shows 20 minutes because I love long-form wrestling podcasts. Trust me, I'm ready to sit down for 5 hours and take my whole day just macro dosing it. But I can't handle my voice for longer than 5 minutes. So trying to put that on an audience already when in the A7FL you hear me 9 hours a week, I don't want to inflict that on anybody else, especially people like my poor roommate who have to hear me every day anyway. They don't need me into talking into this fakakta mic more often than 25 minutes a week. But when it comes to the research, it's just trying to find what's out there, just trying to see if I can hit a weird little pocket or a section that nobody really talks about, or, hey, this is something that might play well with the audience or might try to tell the story a little bit differently. It's not easy because the worst part about professional wrestling history is the fact, and I've said this before, we as a business for nearly a century were actively trying to hide our tracks. Hide records, hide anything that showed the inner workings or developments of the industry. Luckily, we have people like Dan Parker, who was the original wrestling podcaster, the original sheet writer, who wrote up here for the New York Daily Mirror and basically broke kayfabe when nobody even knew what that word was or what that even meant. We had smart marks back in the 50s in post-Korea America. Right in the middle of the baby boom, we had smart marks. So this mentality, this kind of storytelling, this kind of fugazi nonsense that has permeated in pro wrestling, especially over the last 5 years in the rise of tribalism, has always existed. It's just the delivery systems and the manifestations and the players just change with what's going on at the time.
When you look at it, right, and you're doing all that, what are some topics that are like coming up that you are looking forward to talking about, looking forward to digging into?
The Oxbaker riot in Cleveland. That's something that I think Jim Cornette's talked about. Bob Luce covered it in his videotape series. Would love to talk about that. Just the continued attempts by Pedro Martinez to try to just beat Vince McMahon Sr. or Toots Mondt or what would end up being the Capital Wrestling Corporation. Just this near constant wanting to bring the fight. And also just the destabilization of New York wrestling. It's very much like a poorly took over Banana Republic in the late 70s. The booker for Madison Square Garden is always changing hands. The talent is always changing hands. The houses will fluctuate from 20,000 one month to maybe 9 to 10,000 the next. It's just trying to figure out the business trends and trying to tell the story of, hey, all of this that we're complaining about now has happened before and has happened in all the same places at different times, but it's the same thing again and again and again. In New York City in the 1940s, wrestling was on from different parts of the country or even the city like 5 times a week. So when we think about that live pro wrestling in the 1940s, when it's headlock, take down, get it again, and that's the finish. 5 times a week at the nascent era of television. Now, in the streaming era, we have how many hours a week of national, international wrestling television? It's all the same thing. It's just different coats of paint and different types of bumps.
Let me turn it over to Lavie because I know he's got a bunch of good questions for you.
So, Matt, you had mentioned Catalyst Wrestling, and obviously it's something you're very passionate about. So I want to take us back to, when was it, late September, early October 2023. I had attended a show at the Old Y in Harlem.
Yes.
First, I was confused. I went to the Y, and then I was pointed across the street. I had received a message from you the day before. Come, we're gonna be not too far from you. And I was like, what are you talking about? There's a show that's happening in Brooklyn, outside, duck tacos. Not that I've ever had those, but it became sort of like a staple venue for you. I saw Masha Slamovich, many other talents, and so on. And then those shows aired through your distribution system. And then, that was kind of it. So sort of what happened, sort of like as a case study, and where are you now with Catalyst?
So the great thing about pro wrestling is we build community. And one of the things that we tried to do in Catalyst Wrestling is not screw over our audience. So during late September of 2023, we were about to get hit with a hurricane or a tropical storm. The weather was going to be bad, and we ran an outdoor venue. And we knew this was probably going to be our last show of the year until maybe our anniversary show. And we wanted to deliver a great show, and we wanted to deliver for our audience and our sponsors. And we wanted to get this done. We wanted to figure out a way to do this. We offered refunds for everyone or tickets for our next event, whenever that is. And people took that up. And economically, we ran the show. Those refunds did hurt us, but we made sure everyone got paid. Everything got handled. Every vendor was, paid out and approximated. Not approximated, I'm sorry. And we took a hiatus. We were definitely burnt out. We ran for 5-6 years, especially during the pandemic, as frequently as we could, as consistently as we could, keeping up with original and new television every single week. And we took a break to reorganize because we wanted to create a more sustainable model. We wanted to create something to where the overhead for running in New York City wasn't going to hinder our opportunities to be creative and deliver the kind of shows we wanted to deliver to our audience. And that's not a knock against the New York State Athletic Commission. They do what they do for a reason. Mandating a doctor, mandating insurance, mandating all these things. These serve a purpose to protect the athletes. I'm not going to argue that. I'm not going to argue over measures to make sure that if something, God forbid, happens to a talent anywhere, that they have medical or professional care available to them immediately. But that costs money. And when you're trying to keep ticket prices affordable in a city where everything's expensive, especially the venues, and trying to run niche, creative sports, art, entertainment is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. And you're not trying to just run it for the sake of running it and just throwing it in a high school gym just to do it and hope people show up. You want to deliver a product that is evoking the vision that you think your audience deserves to see professional wrestling. And if we couldn't deliver that, we didn't want to just run shows for the sake of running shows. We partnered up with Pop-Up Powerbomb. Brendan Sokler, one of our producing partners at Catalyst, one of my partners in Catalyst Wrestling, was a producer on those shows. So we helped out with those. We had Bobby Orlando versus Lucas Twitch DeSangro in a 2 out of 3 falls match that is to be continued. We had the first fall done. We have 2 falls left to go. So there is a Catalyst Wrestling match ongoing. But yeah, we wanted to make sure that if we're taking a break, we're doing it for the right reasons, and we're coming back loaded for bear with what we need to do to be successful so we can do more shows, build for our audience, and give them a better product.
So looking at the pro wrestling scene over the last 18 months, it seems like so much has changed. Like, I know that you haven't taken, your finger off the pulse of the market. How has the New York independent scene changed? How have things changed in terms of name talent coming in and supporting shows and making an impact?
I feel like New York pro wrestling's in this weird stasis to where you have House of Glory continuing to run successful shows, branching out into Chicago, a great pro wrestling market, something that can sustain multiple high-level independent wrestling companies. They're expanding their merch business significantly. They're doing what they need to do to grow, and shout out and hats off to them. And then you have different smaller groups popping up in different places. You have a lot of the no ring stuff. New Fear is really, really, really becoming a presence in terms of live entertainment in unsanctioned barroom brawls in New York City. It's a really cool thing, and it's evocative of Shotgun Saturday Night, and it's a very New York kind of thing. And those guys over there have found something that really speaks to an audience, and that is dope. And then you have guys like Victory Pro Wrestling who have really developed something special on the island. It's a lot of spot shows, and it's a big independent feel, but it feels like the market's kind of wide open right now. There's a clear leader at the top, but in terms of name talent, Hog is continuing to be successful by developing students. Charles Mason might be one of the most successful students to ever come out of the House of Glory school. He went from being a guy I managed in a tag team to being one of the key figures in a show at the Hammerstein Ballroom. And integrating with guys like Santana, who's coming off of a great run in TNA right now, is a mainstay there, was a part of that roster going back to when they were running split shows with FTW. So they truly are the leader, but I think that there's a lot of room for different opportunities and different possibilities. Battle Club is going to be amping up. They've been doing a lot of stuff with their students, shooting a lot of stuff for social and digital media. I think right now we're just seeing a new crop of talent, a new crop of promoters, a new crop of ideas come up from New York City wrestling. And I think the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see that really take shape, and we're going to see some real interesting things come out. I just don't know which direction it's going to go aside from where we're at right now.
So in alluding to the Hammerstein, of course, Game Changer Wrestling, I think doing something the second time is always harder. So like, A, what are your thoughts on the Hammerstein Ballroom show upcoming? But B, and we've talked with Brett about this, I'm sure you've heard, like, you could see that there's weakness in ticket sales the last few months. What would you attribute that to? And sort of like, how would you think about getting that back on track?
Well, I'm not going to tell Brett Lauderdale how to run his business in comparison to what he's been doing since he took over GCW a few years ago. What they've been doing is phenomenal for professional wrestling and for the talent on that roster. Wrestling ticket sales is a very weird thing to track. And I was talking about it before. Madison Square Garden. You would think the biggest names in pro wrestling come in there month after month or a few times a year. It would always be sold out. But you could see them at the Sunnyside Gardens. You could see them in Brooklyn. You could see them on TV. You could see all this and this and this. And if it's not, and if you're kind of burnt out on it, I think that that's an effect. It's not necessarily anything they're doing. I think it's just more pro wrestling right now is so segmented and so personalized that trying to take that time away, or an audience trying to take time away or dedicating into something that they may not be as emotionally invested in, and this is just for anything, they may not be as emotionally invested. I'm a New York Giants fan. I'm not as emotionally invested in the New York Giants as I was 6 years ago, let alone 15 years ago. And just because it may not have the stuff that I like right now. Or it's just like, okay, I like this, but I don't know if it might just be hesitancy. It might be hesitancy from the marketplace because fans are like, oh, I don't want to support them because that last show wasn't good, or, all the attacks on it. And I think that a lot of the internet discourse that goes out right now creates a weird feedback loop that basically makes people work themselves into a shoot and saying, I can't go to this because I have to hate this. It could be any number of those things. I don't know if there's one definitive answer, but when you look at audience behavior, when you look at how things have been trending, especially in pro wrestling in terms of audience the last few years, they can run cold really, really quickly, and there could not really be one clear explanation, but these little macro fissures that build up over time, and people just kind of stop caring. And also, New York is one of the most overserved major markets in the country. New York, Chicago, maybe LA, in terms of big shows. They're coming off of the Madison Square Garden house show. They're coming off of 3 days at the Hammerstein, even before, after GCW had announced, and all this other stuff. And you're dealing with post-holidays. How many people are willing to stretch however much money you have to spend on Ticketmaster, on tickets, on fees? There's not a lot of concessions at the Hammerstein Ballroom, so you may have to eat in Midtown. It's the same argument you make to why baseball tickets or football tickets or hockey tickets, basketball tickets are too expensive, because the cost doesn't necessarily become worth the expense. And it could be that, it could be any number of things. If you try to parse the one real reason why audience goes away, you keep finding more reasons, and it starts to sound like excuses instead of an actual case study on why audiences are actually fickle as hell.
The Hanukkah hangover, as a Shapiro would understand. So a few months ago, I wouldn't say I declared the death of, but I sort of said maybe we were past the end of the Super Show, meaning the Northeast wrestling, big time wrestling, where you bring in a number of name talents who aren't too far outside of TV, or maybe they're legends and so on, and you build a show around that. And if it's a market where there's been interest in wrestling, but it's been underserved, you could do well. We saw that for years with the Mid-Hudson Civic Center. But now we had a wonderful success just over the past week, sort of the revival of the Mid-Hudson Civic Center with awesome championship wrestling, and sort of like a grassroots thing with talent and some of those behind the House of Hardcore. But they got 1,500, 1,600 people. So do you see that it's like a potential one-off, or maybe around the country, there's all these markets that had once been served by WWE that aren't being served now?
I think as we see the WWE's live event business kind of slowly get sunsetted, the way at least it seems that TKO management has taken a less aggressive look at non-televised live events, I think that might create a lot of opportunity, if not for regional promotions. It could be a huge opportunity for TNA or the NWA or even GCW or MLW to step in and try to serve a lot of that. And to that point, Lavie, I just referenced TNA, MLW, NWA. That's 3 promotions that serve a more than regional audience, that serve on platforms that anybody in the world can essentially watch their programming. So it's a lot of wrestling, and it's a lot of opportunities to see talent that have appeared on TV or have that kind of value. When you look at the top talent in TNA, it's Nick Nemeth. When you look at the top talent in MLW, it's Matt Riddle. It's guys that have been in the WWE who would fill out those NEW shows, who would main event the Mid-Hudson Civic Center for a House of Hardcore show, or for the shows down at the arena during big signing weekends. I think that as the larger national companies tend to take more market share, that kind of super show is less of a consistent thing. But independent wrestling has always been malleable, and certain things about it always stay kind of consistent. So I think we're going to see that in smaller towns. Like, I think that when C towns are no longer a thing, in terms of, like, NXT is basically covering the venues that Raw would basically serve in the mid-90s. That's basically where they're looking at as the venues to run their TV outside of the CWC. Maybe another company can look at that as a model and try to run venues like that in their area, or try to open up with those as the big towns, though, as the big venues, saying, hey, come see wrestling in the same venue. There's WWE International Television once a year or something like that. I can see different promoters taking that kind of tack, but it's really hard to say it's the death of one thing, but it's about, for me, it's how does the national scene reflect everything else? So if MLW and the NWA and TNA continue to expand into these towns and expand into these markets and try to build out of that the same way Jim Cornette tried to build off the Sinclair TVs, that might be the model for a lot of these companies going forward.
So speaking of TNA, an interesting side story is this sort of supplemental distribution. We're seeing, it popping up, and it'll probably start increasing right now. TV, the Diginet distribution, the regional sports network, the type of thing, Matt, you and I would strategize on with Catalyst, in terms of underground distribution, and each one is very exciting. But like, what does it foretell? Do you think it's just sort of like a sidecar and it's supplementing Access TV, and this has nothing to do with their pursuit of another major network? Or maybe this foretells to say, like, maybe we're not going to get there with another network, so let's start filling in the blanks. One of my concerns with it, and then I'll stop talking, is that sometimes the perception is if you're on digital networks and then you're trying to come to a Vice, maybe they look at it and they're sort of like, I don't know, like, is this the type of product that we want to have on our network? What do you make of all that?
I think that as more and more people get fast channel access, the less that's going to matter. Because if you are able to use that as a sizable ROI, if you're able to utilize your content, utilize your back catalog, utilize your connections to build off of that, why are you going to deny yourself more income? Why are you going to, especially when you're trying to be more aggressive in the venues you're running, in the markets you're in, the talent you're trying to pick up, the talent you're re-signing, why are you not going to try to tap every type of resource and every type of thing that you can to monetize your product? And if a Vice looks at that and says, I don't know if I want to work with that, when they're distributing their content digitally amongst a million other platforms, trying to make the same kind of money off of make money back off of their original programming, then they're short-sighted and hypocritical. If you put together a deal to where you included them on your fast channel, or you were able to do that, I think the exclusivity in content is going to be rarer and rarer. First run ownership of content is going to be rarer and rarer for archives. And we're going to see it a lot more segmented, in my opinion, over the next few years, especially when it comes to pro wrestling. I think that that's going to be a big part of the secondary content wars that we're seeing develop as MLW still looks for a bigger partner beyond BN, as the NWA continues to look for a consistent broadcast partner. It's trying to find the blend of production, content, storytelling, and marketing that can just keep and develop an audience. I don't think they'll care if that fast channel audience is able to convert and show up every Wednesday or Thursday night or whenever they're going to air Impact on their channel.
So one of the new changes, of course, over the last 18 months, but much more recently, is this WWE ID program, a different track towards developing talent. Given your connections and what people share with you, maybe some people already under such a contract, what's the feedback that you're getting and concerns? And as a promoter, how would you work with and spotlight that talent to maximize it?
Well, what I've heard so far is kind of what everybody else has heard. You know, this is basically a spotlight highlighting guys, trying to put them in opportunities. And I think it's going to evolve into these guys getting signed. But I think this is Paul Levesque and TKO's version of spotlighting guys for the Dory Funk finishing school. I think it's another version of that. I think it's just kind of redshirting guys on the indies saying, hey, we got dibs. These are our guys. We're going to find ways to put them on platforms, utilize our connections, give them opportunities with promotions and schools that we trust to help finish and season them. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for the talent. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for these schools and these trainers to give them the chance to really, really show what they can do and give this talent platforms that they never could have imagined 5 years ago. I think it's a really aggressive way to develop an NIL program within the independent wrestling world. I do worry, like a lot of other people, that the potential negative side effects could come out from something like this, but we haven't really seen what it looks like yet. I think we're still in the early stages of this, so I'm in a real wait and see approach. If I know some talent that are on there on those ID contracts. I've worked with quite a few of them. I would just try to find ways to make the most out of their time with us. Like throwing the WWE ID logo on our poster is dope, but being able to maximize that talent's ability would be my main focus. Like if I had a guy like Jackson Drake, I would do everything I can to turn him into the next Eddie Gilbert type wrestler who can do things in the ring that Eddie Gilbert couldn't dream of. But boy, do you want to slap Jackson Drake in the face sometimes, because he's just so hateable and he's so good and he's so young and it's so frustrating. And that's the thing that I want to show an audience, and how I want to generate the value of these guys is finding the thing that the WWE saw, or finding the thing that would be the most valuable to them on national television and building that out. That's the main job of anybody who brings in a talent that is being groomed for the next level. If you're being entrusted with this talent, if you're being entrusted with this personality to help your product, and another company is giving them the rub, if you're a AAA baseball team and you're getting Francisco Lindor on a rehab assignment, you're going to do everything you can to make Francisco Lindor's appearance, his time there, feel great. Do everything you can to make him feel at home, make him feel a part of your atmosphere, make him feel a part of your locker room. And to your audience, you're going to say, hey, Francisco Lindor's here. He's not going to be here all the time. This is a really big deal, and sell it as such, and sell the value of it. Say, hey, come see the future of the biggest wrestling company on the planet before anybody else does. I think that's where the value is, at least, spitballing with some friends late at night on a Tuesday.
Thanks, Matt. Let me turn over to John.
Now, where could everybody find you social media-wise, and also find the pod?
Well, you can find Historically Speaking on YouTube by searching Historically Speaking. You can also find me on social media by searching Matt Ryan Yells, or on TikTok, Matt Ryan is Yelling. I throw up classic promos, classic pieces of lost or secret wrestling history, and highlights from Historically Speaking on there as well. Historically Speaking is available wherever you get podcasts. There are 3 episodes up right now. You can run through all of them in under 90 minutes, and I promise you my voice is worth it. If you were able to sit through this, you'll be able to sit through Historically Speaking, because there's cool audio and other stuff in there. It may not be as dope as Lavie and John, but I do think you'll be able to enjoy it. And watch Catalyst Wrestling on YouTube, on wherever Catalyst Wrestling is. Just search Catalyst Wrestling across the internet, and you will find it somewhere. You can even buy it on DVD, I think, on Best Buy, Amazon, Walmart. Search Catalyst Wrestling wherever you internet, and please watch it.
All right, Matt, thank you so much for joining us yet again. Awesome stuff. Thank you.
Appreciate you guys. Happy New Year.
Happy
Thanks,
New
Matt.
Year. Lavie, let's get to the rest of the news here. Let's see what else is going on. What about the Mid-Hudson Civic Center, which we kind of just briefly mentioned there, and AC-Dub?
Yeah, so the best way to look at this is just a snippet from Rob Crowther of BCP Plus. Awesome Championship Wrestling debuts in Pittsburgh. An amalgamation of the best talent in the Northeast independents, legends, and current world champions from multiple promotions all came together for the debut show at the MJN Center in Poughkeepsie, New York. The show was a love letter to ECW, while also showcasing the future of wrestling in front of a sold-out crowd of 1,500. ACW isn't your average independent promotion. In fact, it was run very much like a weekly team. Founders Hale Collins and Vic Delicious of the Now tag team spent relentless hours promoting locally, appearing on nearly every radio station in town. In a recent social media post, Vic and Hal shared, "It's very hard to encapsulate what last night meant to us personally and professionally. Our journey throughout this world of wrestling has come with our share of ups and downs. Many of you have been along for the ride. ACW started as literally just a wild idea. We were approached several times over the last year to bring wrestling back to Poughkeepsie, but either the timing wasn't right, or the thought process of it being a dead market got the better of others. Ultimately, we knew it came down to us and our love for this area that building the amazing sport of wrestling. So we took a chance. We had the right partners who we had known for years and were instrumental in getting House of Hard years ago. Many meetings were had. Many tough conversations took place. Lots of ideas thrown from the table, from setting a date to choosing a name, designing logos, settling on promotional direction, booking the talent, choosing the matches, and so on. So a really interesting in-depth article that you should go and check out.
How about ROW? What's going on with Booker T?
So last time, of course, I shared my complicated promotional ideas. So I'm not going to go that far this time, but not surprisingly, of course, given the size of the venue, they did have to expand a bit, and certainly that will be sold out by showtime. WrestleTix had the count of setup of 416, 409 tickets distributed as of a few days in advance of the show. Certainly that will be a sellout. I'm most curious in terms of where they go from there.
How about the NWA? What's going on with Billy Corgan? What's going on with Adventures in Carneyland?
Yeah, so I think people shouldn't get too excited about this, meaning that Adventures in Carneyland, which we talked about extensively when it first came out, which I found like pretty interesting as a show. Now it's on Peacock. So people are thinking, well, Adventures in Carneyland, it's about the NWA, it's Peacock. Maybe the NWA could get on there, perhaps. But we have to remember that bumping the NWA from, its previous platforms was, deals made with WWE, apparently. So that's not necessarily connecting the two, but certainly getting Adventures in Carneyland out to another audience that can watch it and enjoy it is something interesting. Just looking at their show on January 11th at the OC Theater, Shockwave, one of their tentpole events. Tickets have picked up for that. So interesting to see what the final number is that we can reflect on next time.
How about MLW? Anything going on with MLW?
So just quickly looking at the same date, January 11th, a big night for wrestling, right? Like talking about all the possibilities for those that really do want to follow the modern stuff. I'm not sure if you can stream reality wrestling at that time. At certain times they've done, and then certain times not. But just in terms of reflecting on all the wrestling that's going on. But Kingsland Coliseum in Texas, one of my favorite venues that I've mentioned that they've run, MLW. Basically just bleacher tickets remain. So really curious what a final number ends up there. Obviously it did really well, and it should look great on TV.
Finally, the financial earnings. What's going on with the schedule?
So, a lot of times, of course, people focus on WWE, and rightly so, obviously, but also, some of the big media distributors now involved with WWE and certainly AEW as well. But three that I'd like to take that people should take a look at. One, Cyber Agent, which is sort of like the sleeping giant of pro wrestling with its Cyber FITE division, which from the report, I don't think you would get too much insight into pro wrestling, but you could get a sense of how they're doing as a company, because I was searching keywords, in the English version, of course. I couldn't find mentions of pro wrestling. It's deep within another department. But January 28th are those earnings. But in terms of something that we'll see the first Triller post-merger quarterly report, which is interestingly planned to come out on a Saturday, February 15th. And Bushi Road is always informative. Usually I'm like finding my way to the website randomly to see if a report had come out anytime soon, but now I'm trying to be more planned and share that information with our wonderful audience. So Monday, February 17th, 2025 will be the Bushi Road earnings.
All right. Good stuff, Lavie. Great stuff from Mr. Matt Ryan, who returns to the show once again. Let's head towards the plugs here. Let's head towards the finish. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2ManPowerTrip. Lavie, what do you got going on?
And congrats, John, on 10 years of podcasting. It's a pleasure to learn from you. So on X, Lavie Mark, LAVIE-MARG, my long-form articles, LionCubJobSearch.com. On LinkedIn, The Business of the Business. We are the official business podcast of PW Ponderings, and we're distributed by the Creative Control Network.
Good stuff as always, Lavie. I'd like to thank everybody out there for tuning in. Of course, again, got to thank Matt Ryan from Historically Speaking, and of course, Catalyst Wrestling. Check them out. I implore you to check them out. Great stuff. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. We'll see you right back here next week for a little business of the business. We'll see you next week, folks.